How's it going, everybody? I'm Andrew from ISC Suspension North America, and today we're going to show you how to install ISC N1 coilovers using our 2014 Forester XT project car. So before we dig into the installation, we want to go over some of the basic features of the N1 coilovers and also some of the specifics of this particular model for the 2014 Plus Forester XT. One of the nice features about this model in particular is many brands will just utilize a 08 to 14 WX application for this chassis Forester. These are specific and unique to the vehicle. So we have longer shock bodies, more stroke and travel, as well as a longer bottom mount as well. So height adjustability here is pretty significant compared to the 08 Plus WX. This particular set for this Forester XT comes with a 10K front and 8K rear. On today's installation, we're also going to include a ISS coilover spring upgrade for all four corners. What this allows for is increased stroke, increased pitch, and the spring itself is up to 20% lighter than what's included on traditional coilovers. Increased ride quality and performance is noticeable with these springs, and they come highly recommended for people looking for a custom spring rate or want something that can bring them to the next level with their drivability, whether it's on the street or the track.
Hey guys, Jorel here with ISC Suspension. I'm going to be helping out on the install for this 2014 Forester XT that we have here. Alright, so now we're going to show you guys how to install the ISS spring onto your ISC coilovers, as well as setting the preload and the points of anti-seize. To remove the top camber plate, you're going to remove this here 19mm nut, slide off your camber plate, slide off the thrust bearing, and then replace the spring with the ISS spring. As you can see, we have our anti-seize applied throughout the bottom mount on the threaded body, as well as just under the collars for your preload. You'll notice right now that the spring is loose, moves up and down freely. You can move it side to side. What preload's going to do is going to put a little bit of tension on here. It's going to load it up and allow it to perform properly. So best way to do that, go ahead and remove any of the play that's in the spring. So just walk this big collar up until it holds the spring steady, but you should still be able to rotate it. It's not too compressed or anything. And then bring your second collar, the smaller collar, just up to the bottom of it. You don't want to lock it in place. You don't want to tighten anything down now. This is where we're going to start the preload process. You can do it by hand. Sometimes it's a little bit tough. That's where your spinner tools are going to come into play. The large one, obviously, for the large collar, and lefty loosey, righty tighty. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to go ahead and adjust the large collar and make it a little bit tighter against the spring. The cool thing about our spanner tools is the width right here is actually 5mm. So you can just go until you can slide this right between those two collars. And now it's fitting in there pretty flush. And now you can go ahead and pull this top or the bottom collar up to the larger collar. Once that's set, you'll notice that if you try really hard, you can rotate everything, but the spring has a little bit of tension on it, which is going to allow it to work properly for you. So now we're just going to go ahead and lock these down, and we'll be ready to install. All right, so now that our coilovers are all prepped for installation, we're going to go ahead and get some measurements of the stock vehicle ride height. That's just going to allow us to make our adjustments after we get them installed. You're going to start by just getting an overall view of the car and then measuring from the very center of the fenders straight down to the ground. So you want to see what the overall fender height for the front and rear. All right, we got all of our measurements. Now it's time to go ahead and lift the vehicle. Make sure that if you're not on a lift, if you're using a jack, to always use jack stands underneath. And then also on the lift, just make sure it's secure once you are getting ready to take the wheels off. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and start on the fronts. You're gonna need a 19mm socket to go ahead and get your lug nuts off. And then on the inside, we'll go over what else is needed as far as tools. We got our wheel off. You're gonna see on the front, there's an ABS line right here. There's gonna be a plastic clip that presses through. We're gonna go ahead and compress that with some pliers. Then we have our top 19mm bolt and nut, and then another one just below it. On the back side, you're gonna have your brake line, and this is gonna be another 12mm that we're gonna be using. Same with the top bolts. And that pops off. And then we're gonna go ahead and move to the back. We're gonna use a 12mm socket on a ratchet and just kind of break it loose. And then once that's loose, it comes off pretty easy from there. And then this simply just slides right out of the way. And you'll see on your coilovers, it's gonna be pretty much identical design to the OEM stuff. Next, we're gonna go ahead and move to our 19mm nuts and bolts. You wanna just hold one in place, and then with your impact, another 19mm socket. Loosen it up a bit. I always try to keep them in until both of them are loose. In the engine bay, we're going to take the three 12mm nuts off the top of the strut. Once you get them, get two of them off and you're working on that last one, you want to leave that connected and preferably have somebody give you a hand removing the strut, or you can reach over the fender and hold on to it. So we got the 12mm nuts off the top of the strut, so now we're going to go ahead and remove it. You're going to have to avoid the ABS line and the brake line. It's way easier to go toward the front. So you just want to clear that line while lowering the top, and she's out. So we have the coilover in place. We went ahead and lowered it slightly, I think about 1.5 inches, just to get it to line up with the hub a little bit better. And then you'll see we started one of the 19mm bolts. We're going to start the other one here shortly. In practice, it's always nice to have a jack handy, or maybe a friend that will be able to lift up the hub for you. And we'll make lining all of this up a little bit easier. We just took a measurement in between the lower small collar and then the bottom, or the top small collar. We had 5 inches on the air side, we had 4 3/4 on this side. So we're gonna go ahead and show you how to adjust the height to match it.
So as Jorel's turning it counterclockwise, you can see the threaded shock body rising from the bottom mount. So the representation of that gap between the bottom mount and the bottom collar that he's closing in on right now will express how much you just raised the coilover. Double check your measurements just to be sure.
It looks like we're spot on, 5 inches.
Since we're located here in New England, we have harsh weather conditions, especially in the winter. Salt on the roads, everything of that nature. So as an additional precautionary, just to add protection to the coilovers, we are going to do some ISC coilover covers. If you're not familiar with these, they're 3mm neoprene, similar to what a wetsuit is made out of, and they have an adjustable Velcro diameter. So for different coilovers with different diameters, you can adjust accordingly, and it also makes it easy because you don't have to take the coilover off or apart to install them. So we're going to throw these on real quick. So get the top of the cover itself over your thrust bearing. And these come in different lengths, a 300 and a 370mm. So after you remove your trunk liner and everything of that nature, this is what you're going to be looking at least with this chassis Forester. So to access the tops of the rear shocks, which we need to utilize, it's going to be two 12mm under here that will loosen up, and that'll release the shock. So we're gonna pop these two clips here, and you could probably use a flathead. We just kind of gave it a little bit of force and they kind of popped out like that. And here is the top of the OEM strut, and that's where our coilovers are going to end up. There's also another axis panel that Subaru put here to make coilover installation easier. Same thing. Now we have a lot more space to work with.
The back wheel's off already. We got it supported on the jacks on the lift here. And what we're going to start with is on the bottom side of the control arm, you're going to have a 17mm nut and bolt, another 17mm nut and bolt that holds your shock in place, and then right here is what holds your end link in place. That's going to be a 14mm nut and bolt. To make it easier to drop the control arm, if we go to the front, you're going to see another 17mm nut and bolt. That's going to allow this arm to come out of the way, and then you can move the knuckle around a little bit easier.
Now that the bottom portion is all released with the control arm and end links, the only thing holding the stock strut on now are these two 14mm here on the top. So we're going to loosen these up, and then Jorel is going to catch the strut underneath, and it'll be time to put the coilovers on. Go for it. Here we have the coilover. Jorel is underneath holding it up for us, and then hand tight. Just get these on there. That way your helper underneath can let go. And if you notice, the Allen key clicker isn't connected. We just took it off to get it up through the chassis, just to prevent it from banging around and potentially getting damaged. So now that this is secured, you can just insert it back in and start at middle dampening, 16 clicks. And you can adjust from there based on your personal preference and driving characteristics.
We got the rear coilover in place. And now we're going to start focusing on getting the 17mm nut and bolts in these two holes, and then tightening up the end link bolt. I already put that in. And then on the front, we got to get this bracket line back up, bolt it back up, and then we'll do the same on the other side.
So let's get a double check, make sure everything is tight. And like we did in the front, we're going to throw on the coilover covers in the rear here. As I mentioned before, we used the 370s for the fronts. These here are 300s. As you can see, they're slightly shorter, and due to the nature of this car, the strut here, or the coilover itself now, is pretty short compared to the fronts, so the 300 will be more appropriate of a fit. So here we have the finished product. Make sure the wheels are torqued, and now we are finished with the installation, and we're going to align the car and go for a drive.